Blood drips from shaking hands. The first blood ever spilled by murder. Fresh. Warm. Accusatory. A man stumbles forward through barren lands, each footstep sinking into dirt that refuses his touch. Alone with his thoughts and the crushing weight of what he's done. This is Cain. The world's first murderer. His brother's blood still warm on his hands, a divine mark burning on his forehead, both his protection and his prison. A brand declaring to all who he is. What he's done. The invisible stain of fratricide made visible for all to see. But what the ancient texts don't explain is what happens next. How does a marked murderer find love in a world barely populated? Who would become the wife of history's first killer? And how does a man cursed to wander eventually build mankind's first city? Today, we unravel one of the Bible's most fascinating mysteries. A story of rage and redemption, of jealousy and justice, of how even in mankind's darkest hour, hope found a way to survive. The ground beneath his feet feels wrong now, hostile. This is his punishment from the Creator, to wander a land that refuses to yield to his touch. Every step reminds him of what he's lost. Every breath carries the weight of what can never be undone. Cain's world began simply enough. The dawn of human history was still fresh. The Garden of Eden still a recent memory for his parents. He was the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, the world's first family. The first child ever born of woman. The miracle of new life after the fall from paradise. His mother had named him Cain, a name meaning acquired or brought forth. With the Lord's help, I have brought forth a man, she had declared, hope vibrant in her voice. Hope that perhaps this child would be the promised one who would crush the serpent's head. Hope that redemption had begun. As Cain grew, so did his younger brother Abel. Two brothers forming the beginning of human civilization. While Abel developed an affinity for animals and tended flocks, Cain worked the soil, fighting against the thorns and thistles that were part of the curse. Hard work that built calluses on his hands and, unknowingly, pride in his heart. Day after day, he toiled. Sweat dripping from his brow into the reluctant earth. Waging war against weeds and drought. Watching as seeds he planted either withered or flourished by forces he couldn't entirely control. When the time came to present offerings to God, Abel selected the finest firstborn lambs from his flock, fat portions that represented the best he had to offer. The smoke from his altar rose straight toward heaven, as if eagerly received. Cain brought produce from the ground, the same ground now cursed because of his parents' disobedience. The same soil he'd struggled to make fertile. Fruits of labor that represented months of backbreaking effort, fighting against a world that no longer yielded easily to human hands. God looked with favor upon Abel's offering, the smoke ascending in a perfect column to the heavens. But Cain's offering received no such blessing. The smoke from his altar hovered low, spreading outward rather than upward. A visible rejection that cut deep into his heart. And something dark took root in Cain's heart. Something that twisted and grew with each passing day. Why are you angry? God asked him. Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. But Cain couldn't hear these words through the roaring in his ears. Couldn't see past the red haze of jealousy clouding his vision. Why had Abel been favored? Hadn't he, Cain, worked harder? Struggled more? Fought against an unforgiving earth while Abel merely watched animals graze? Night after night, Cain lay awake, the perceived injustice festering within him. Each time he saw Abel's flocks growing, each time he noticed his younger brother's peaceful countenance, the wound deepened. The questions multiplied. Why him? Why not me? For days, he avoided his brother, unable to look at him without feeling the burn of resentment. Their parents noticed the tension but didn't comprehend its depth. How could they? They had never experienced the sting of divine rejection. They had known paradise. Cain had known only the struggle. Then came the morning when he could bear it no longer. When the sight of Abel's contented smile broke something within him. "Come with me to the field," he said to Abel. Simple words. Innocent words. Words that would change everything. Abel followed without hesitation. Without suspicion. Why would he fear his own brother? Violence was still a foreign concept in this young world. No one had yet died by another's hand. In that field, far from their parents' eyes, rage and resentment exploded into violence. The conversation began calmly enough, with Cain questioning Abel about his offering. But Abel's answers, his innocent confusion at Cain's anger, only fueled the fire. "God sees the heart," Abel said. Perhaps that's why. The first blow caught Abel completely by surprise. How could he have expected it? There was no precedent for this. No pattern to recognize. No warning to heed. One brother struck another. Then again. And again. Until Abel's pleas for mercy faded into silence. And for the first time, human blood soaked into the earth. The ground that had been cursed to resist man's touch now eagerly drank the evidence of man's first murder. Cain stood over his brother's body, his rage replaced by a cold, creeping horror. What had he done? Abel's eyes stared upward, unseeing. The flock keeper would tend sheep no more. Cain buried his brother hastily, his hands trembling as he covered the body with soil. As if hiding the evidence could somehow erase the act itself. Later, when God asked, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain uttered those infamous words, dripping with defiance masking terror, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" As if the Creator of all things could be deceived. As if the one who formed man from dust couldn't hear the cry of blood from that same dust. God's response was swift and terrible. "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." The words fell like stones upon Cain's shoulders. The earth, his livelihood, his passion, his domain, would no longer obey his touch. The very skill that had defined him was being stripped away. A farmer who could not farm. A grower who could not grow. Cain's punishment was severe, banishment. Total separation. The ground that had been his life's work would now reject him. The family that had been his foundation would now be left behind. He would wander, marked, alone, with only his guilt as a companion. The full weight of his actions crashed down upon him. Not just the taking of Abel's life, but the grief it would cause his parents. The void it would leave in their small community. The legacy of violence he had introduced into the world. "My punishment is more than I can bear," Cain cried out, his voice breaking. "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But who would find him? Who else existed to enact such vengeance? His parents? The siblings that would come after? Or was there something, someone, else out there that Cain feared? God, in his mysterious justice tempered with mercy, placed a mark on Cain, a sign that would protect him from being killed, yet also brand him forever as what he was. The first murderer. Forever set apart. The mark burned as it appeared on his forehead, searing itself into his flesh like a covenant of shame. "Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over," God declared. A protection embedded within the punishment. A mercy woven into justice. The last sight Cain had of his home was his mother's face, streaked with tears for both sons, one dead, one damned. Adam stood silently, his expression a stone mask hiding untold grief. No words of farewell were spoken. What could be said to the man who had introduced death to your family? Cain turned eastward, away from the presence of the Lord, away from his parents, away from everything familiar. Each step carried him further into the unknown. Into the land of Nod, a name meaning wandering. A place that would become both his exile and his future. The first night alone was the hardest. No fire. No shelter. No family nearby. Just Cain and the endless sky above, stars like accusing eyes staring down at the marked man below. He tried to sleep but found only nightmares, Abel's blood pooling, Abel's eyes dimming, Abel's voice silenced forever. Days passed. Then weeks. Cain moved through forests and across plains, foraging for food since he could not grow it. The mark on his forehead burned in the sun during the day and throbbed in the darkness of night, a constant reminder. Sometimes he would catch his reflection in still waters and stare at the strange symbol emblazoned on his skin, a divine hieroglyph declaring his crime and his protection. He tried once to plant seeds in a promising patch of soil. The ground blackened and withered beneath his touch, the seeds rotting rather than sprouting. The curse was real, inescapable. At night, in the depths of his solitude, questions plagued him. What was this strange new world he wandered through? Who else might inhabit it? The scriptures say Adam and Eve were the first humans. Their sons, Cain and Abel, the first children born. Genesis briefly mentions Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters, but gives no timeline, no names. Were these siblings born before Cain's crime? Or after? And if Cain feared being killed, who did he fear would do the killing? Had God created others beyond Eden? Other communities, other families, populating this vast earth? As Cain wandered further east, the questions that haunted him weren't just about his own survival, but about meaning. What purpose remained for a man cursed to wander? What future for someone carrying the weight of mankind's first murder? Was he destined to walk alone until death claimed him too? And what would become of humanity if the first branch of its family tree had been so violently pruned? The terrain grew more challenging as weeks stretched into months. Mountains rose before him, their peaks disappearing into clouds. He climbed until his legs ached and his lungs burned, then descended into lush valleys unlike anything he had known before. One night, as he huddled in the shelter of a rocky overhang, a violent storm unleashed its fury. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the ground, and Cain, for the first time since his banishment, felt small. Insignificant. A speck in the vast creation of a God whose voice he would never hear again. But morning brought sunshine and, unexpectedly, clarity. Perhaps being insignificant was its own kind of freedom. Perhaps there was life to be found even in wandering. That same day, he spotted what looked like thin smoke rising in the distance. Human smoke. A fire. Cain hesitated, the mark on his forehead suddenly feeling more prominent than ever. But curiosity, and loneliness, drove him forward. A day later, near a small spring where Cain had stopped to drink, he saw her. A young woman, filling a water skin. Her dark hair hung in intricate braids adorned with carved wooden beads. Her garments were different from those he knew, made from materials he didn't recognize. She startled when she noticed him watching, nearly dropping her vessel. "Who are you?" she called, keeping her distance. Her eyes focused on the mark on his forehead, widening slightly. "I am." Cain hesitated, the weight of his true name suddenly too heavy to speak. "I am a wanderer." She studied him carefully, one hand reaching for a small knife at her waist. "From where do you wander?" "From the west," he answered, unwilling to say more. The less she knew, the safer she would be. The less likely she would run from him in horror. "My father speaks of the west," she said, her posture relaxing slightly though her hand remained near her blade. "Of the garden where the first ones lived. Of the man and woman who walked with the Creator before the great separation." Cain felt the blood drain from his face. Your father knows of them? Of Adam and Eve? The woman nodded. The stories have been passed down. The Creator told our ancestors of what happened in the garden. Of how the separation came to be. And in that moment, Cain understood something profound. Something that shifted his entire understanding of the world. Adam and Eve had not been the only creations of God, merely the first, the ones whose story was told in detail. Others had been formed, placed elsewhere in this vast world. Different tribes, different families, all children of the same Creator. The Genesis account was the beginning, but not the entirety. The story focused on one branch of humanity, the branch from which salvation would eventually come, but other branches existed. Other communities, planted by the same divine hand. The mark, she said suddenly, pointing to his forehead. Our elders speak of such a mark. The sign of the first killer. The brand of Cain. His name hung in the air between them. He could deny it. Could run. Could continue his solitary wandering. Instead, he nodded once, bracing himself for her fear. For her rejection. But she merely tilted her head, studying him with unexpected compassion. The stories say the mark is both punishment and protection. That the Creator's justice is never without mercy. You're not afraid, he asked, genuinely confused. Should I be? If the Creator has spared you, who am I to question? The woman's name was Zillah, which meant shadow or protection. Her people, one of several tribes scattered across the eastern lands, had lived in these regions since their creation, multiplying slowly over the generations since the world began. They knew of Eden, knew of the fall, but from a distance, as one might know of a neighboring country's history. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next. Zillah led Cain to her settlement, a collection of simple dwellings nestled in a fertile valley between two mountain ridges. Clay structures with thatched roofs, arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit. Perhaps 24 people lived there, tending small gardens and herding goats on the surrounding slopes. They fell silent as Cain approached, their eyes immediately drawn to the mark on his forehead. Children were quickly pulled behind protective parents. Men reached for spears and axes. He bears the mark, one woman whispered loudly. The mark of Cain. The killer comes among us, another voice called out. Zillah stepped forward. He is under the Creator's protection, she said firmly. The mark commands us not to harm him. An elderly man emerged from the largest dwelling, his steps slow but deliberate. Deep lines etched his face like a weathered map, eyes cloudy with age but sharp with wisdom. A necklace of polished stones hung around his neck, a symbol of his authority. This is the mark of a killer, said the elder, studying Cain's forehead without touching it. The stories passed down through generations speak of such a mark. Of the first death. Of brother against brother. Cain could not deny it. The lie would have choked him. I killed my brother, he said, his voice hollow, eyes fixed on the ground. The Creator cursed me to wander, but protected me with this mark. He expected them to drive him away. To stone him, perhaps. To finish what God had chosen not to. Instead, the elder nodded slowly, the beads in his long white beard clicking softly together. The Creator judges, but also shows mercy, he said, his voice carrying the weight of sacred tradition. If he has spared you, who are we to contradict? If he has marked you for protection, who are we to harm you? A murmur ran through the gathered tribe, not all agreeing, but none challenging the elder's decision. They allowed him to stay at the edges of their settlement. Not fully welcomed, but not cast out. He constructed a simple lean-to against a large boulder, apart from their dwellings. He slept under the stars, away from their fires, listening to their distant songs and conversations. Each day, Zillah would bring him food. Bread baked from grains he didn't recognize, meat from animals he had never hunted. At first, she said little, leaving quickly after delivering her offerings. But gradually, she began to linger. To ask questions. What was it like? In the West? In the land near the garden? And slowly, Cain began to speak. Of his parents and their stories of Eden. Of walking with God in the cool of the evening. Of the world before his terrible act changed everything. Other members of the tribe occasionally watched these conversations from a distance, curious but cautious. The mark kept them away, but Zillah seemed unbothered by it. Unafraid of its bearer. What was it like to grow things, she asked one afternoon, having learned of his former life as a farmer. To command the earth to produce food? Cain's expression darkened. It was everything. To place a seed in the ground and watch it transform into sustenance. To partner with creation itself. He told her of growing things. Of how he had once made seed sprout from the earth, coaxing life from soil now forbidden to him. How he had taken pride in his harvests, perhaps too much pride. "Show me," she said one day, bringing him to a patch of ground where nothing grew. A barren spot near his shelter. "I cannot," Cain replied, pain evident in his voice. "The earth rejects my touch now. It's part of my punishment." But she pressed seeds into his palm, closed his fingers around them. "Try," she insisted. The Creator's words are final, yes. But perhaps even curses have their limits. His hands trembled as he knelt. The dirt felt hostile, resistant. He pressed the seeds into shallow furrows, expecting nothing but continued rejection. For weeks, nothing happened. The ground remained barren while all around it, Zillah's people's crops flourished. But she continued to visit, continued to talk with him. About the stars. About the animals. About the Creator. About her tribe's understanding of the world and its origins. Slowly, Cain found himself looking forward to these conversations. Found himself watching for her approach. Found himself, against all expectations, experiencing something he had thought forever lost to him. Hope. "Why do you not fear me?" Cain asked her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "You know what I've done. You know who I am." She was silent for a long moment, weaving dried grasses into a basket with nimble fingers. "I see what you did," she replied finally. "Not who you are." Her eyes held his, unafraid. "The Creator marked you, but also protected you. There must be purpose in that." What purpose could there be for a murderer? Cain's voice was bitter, his fingers unconsciously tracing the mark on his forehead. "That," she said simply, "is what you must discover." Something stirred in Cain's chest then. Something he thought had died with Abel in that distant field, buried alongside his brother. Hope. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Gradually, some of the tribe's younger members began approaching Cain, curious about the stranger with the mark. He taught them what he knew of the stars, of tracking time, of the world beyond their valley. One young boy, barely more than a child, would sit for hours listening to Cain's stories.